Thank you very much, Dan. Can everyone hear me okay? Good, good. I'm going to stand behind this because I've got notes and that kind of thing. I do like to wander, but I'll try not to. So first of all, apologies for the somewhat clickbaity title of my talk. I'm mostly going to ignore that, but I do have a somewhat surprising claim that I think should run counter to your expectations of what I should talk about. That creator content doesn't work. That's not what you would expect from someone who founded a games marketing agency. The core of what we do is based on creator content and working with content creators. So I should probably explain why I say that. Because if what you're doing is looking for return on investment, direct return on investment, and run the data on Steam, and I'm talking mostly about Steam here, for a new title, for your launch, your data will almost certainly tell you that the majority of your sales came not from creators, but came from Steam itself, from new and trending or the discovery queue, and it will show you the impact of a sale that you've done or going into a big sale. And if it's before the game's launch, then it'll show you your next best spike. So either the data is lying, or creator content doesn't work. There is a slight asterisk on this, obviously, because obviously that isn't really what I think. And there is, if those two things aren't true, then there must be something else going on that isn't nice and simple and isn't an easy A to B, but is a little bit messy, a bit buggy, and a little bit complicated. So let me explain. But first of all, I will go back in time and explain a little bit about who I am. So over a decade ago, I decamped from games media, where I've been for quite some time. At that point, I was running the business side of brands like Edge and PC Gamer. Before that, I was a games journalist. And this, if you can see it, this is a copy of official PlayStation 2 magazine from June 2004, so almost exactly 20 years ago, when I was editing it. That was a young version of me in that corner. And this was the copy that we announced GTA San Andreas. Some of you will be old enough to remember this, maybe. I'll always remember this particular one because in order to run that cover, we dropped the opportunity to do an exclusive review of Driver 3 and put it on the cover. I don't know how many of you remember Driver 3, but that was one of my better decisions because Driver 3 was a fucking car crash. And but it did mean that the Atari PR at the time didn't talk to me for 2 years, but it was still that was also not a bad plan for me. But those were different times. If any of you are old enough and you remember official PlayStation at all, I imagine you probably bought it for the demos, but there was some really good writing in there. If you've still got copies, go back and find out. There's some really good stuff in there. Anyway, as I said, I decamped from games media about 11 years ago to working with content creators. Specifically going to work for the Yogscast, which many of you will have heard of, which at the time had one of the biggest channels on YouTube, off the back of Minecraft. And what I went there to do was to turn them from being YouTube phenomenons to building a sustainable long-term business with multiple revenue lines, you know, the really fun stuff. So yeah, I was doing the boring bits while they concentrated on making funny videos and streams and do lots of screaming. But what I found when I arrived, and why this is relevant, apart from you knowing a little bit more about me, what I found when I arrived, and bear in mind this was 11 years ago, was amazing to someone with my background in games media, because in games media at that time, and I imagine even more so now, we'd gone from shaping the narrative, being able to really have an impact on sales, and every year that had just got less and less as we went from magazine world where there weren't very many magazines and they had an outsized influence, to endless websites, endless amounts of copy on the internet talking about games. But what I found at that time, and just bear in mind this was 11 years ago, was that a video with more than 1 million views on it could absolutely flood a game server and bring it down pretty easily, or send incredible amounts of traffic to a Steam store page and drive sales of a game. The impact was incredibly clear to see every time we did that. But I will pause here and explain something that is kind of relevant later. Even with something that was so obviously a massive impact, it was impossible to prove 100% that there's a direct link, because gamers stubbornly refuse to click the link in the description. It's just a thing people don't do. They just tab out and go to Steam, or they tab out and go to the game. And because you can't cookie from YouTube to Steam, you couldn't then, you can't now, you can't track that journey with any scientific precision. We did, however, run some tests at that time, because although we knew there was a link, we wanted to see how many people actually did go from those videos. So we isolated the activity and ran tests. It's not a thing you could do in the real world, especially not when you're launching a game, when you've got lots of other noise happening. But when we did that, when we ran those tests, what we found is less than 10% of people basically will do that. Go and click a link in the description when they're asked to. So most people that go to that page and buy at that moment is 90% or so, and that doesn't, which is more important for my overall point, that doesn't include the people who will buy later. That's just the people who buy in that 24 hours. I will come back to that. Anyway, back to the story. So more than a decade ago, more than a decade later now, over 6 years into when I left Yogscast just over 6 years ago, and set up Fourth Floor, games marketing agency. Like I say, very much, we started out as a pure play influencer marketing agency. Now we do an awful lot more, but right at the center of what how we approach it is content creators and working with them, because firmly believe that that's the best way to talk to games audiences, through communities that already exist. So what has happened in that time is that a lot of things have changed, and I think more things have changed about content creation than a lot of people give credit for, especially the people making and marketing games. And it is perhaps because a lot of people came to maturity, if you like, between those years of 2012 and 2015, 2016. They were massively formative when YouTube was just starting to get going, and Twitch, again, was just starting to, well, YouTube was just absolutely enormous, and Twitch was just starting to get going. And the platforms have gone from what was then democratizing the creation and the discovery of content, and that was a massive change, and it's, you forget that now, I think. And what they did was, especially YouTube, it created a class, a profession of content creators that didn't exist before. Not just around games, around lots of other areas as well. And now those platforms are social feeds. They're not what they were at that time. They're social feeds, and they're about attention and the ability to grab that attention while people are essentially on their phones. And that's different from the idea of a desktop homepage, and it's really the difference between a very subscriber-based, follower-based model, really, the feed. And that is this change, which is, you 100% see it in YouTube. I presume everyone is watching YouTube. Twitch less so, but it is being accelerated by TikTok, which is obviously born with the idea of the feed. And I think when people are thinking about games makers, games marketers, when they're thinking about who they're going to work with and how they're going to work with them, they often forget the effect of feeds and the effect of actually how people consume content these days. But it's not just the social platforms, the video platforms that have changed. It's also the distribution model. So Steam has changed a lot in that same time period. So this is Steam from 2013 to 2014, and as with YouTube, when you look at the logos and when you think about it, it doesn't actually look like it's changed that much, but an awful lot has changed. 2013, this is when user reviews started. They didn't exist before then. When early access started, Marketplace was only a year old or so, and And what has happened since then is all those things have been built on enormously. There's been a steady stream of changes, and they've turned it from a store into essentially a social network, but a specific kind of social network that recommends games and means that you can see what other people are playing and you can be recommended games. And we're now in a position that you all know where if you're on that platform, and most people are, it's all important for your success, especially if you're self-publishing, indie publisher. So what is my point? As I said before, this is obviously not something I really think, but if you take a strict attribution approach, and a lot of people come to us asking for a strict attribution approach, that is, if someone plays my game, I want to be able to see and map the sales I got from that video. That really doesn't work, and if you want that to work, then creator content doesn't work. The trouble with that kind of attribution, to quote a guy called Tom Roach, who's like a big brain marketing thinker, I would recommend you follow him if you're interested in marketing at all. He says, imagine a football manager believing their centre forward is entirely responsible for every goal. So they get rid of the defence and the midfield and just have 10 centre forwards. Obviously that doesn't work. Okay, maybe football analogies are not brilliant at this audience. I understand that, but hopefully you get the idea, right? That would be a bad idea. Maybe you're thinking, yeah, that sounds really good. Why don't people do that? But the fact is, research consistently shows that marketeers, including some research that came out this week from Nielsen, continue to show that people want this idea of ROI. If you spend money, I want to see where it went, and this is something that certainly got driven by how Facebook works. But even despite the limitations of it, and the fact that you miss so much. And I think Steam's a great example of this, because if you take that kind of approach, that performance marketing, direct attribution view of calculating your spend on what you can measure directly, then Steam would be the only thing that matters. Creators don't work. But we know, everyone in this room, I'm sure, we know that they do. Simon Careless from Game Discover Co. This was from when he was looking at the brilliant PlayTup, which we worked with Yogscast Games on, that had an awful lot of content creators playing it. We know that it works, right? So what is going on, I guess? And if you look at, this is from last week's chart, again on GameDiscover.co, if you look at the games that sell the most, they will have a lot of video happening on them across social and video platforms. It is correlated with higher sales. So it's clear that there's a correlation there, but correlation doesn't mean causation, and there are a lot of other factors happening. So I guess where do we go from here on it? And I'm sure this sort of thing leads to these sorts of ideas, and I'm sure you've all seen this, that Larian Studios and Michael Dow's saying marketing is dead, which is also just a brilliant irony, because this is a fantastic piece of marketing, both for himself and the studio, and to an extent Baldur's Gate, getting loads of coverage and neatly positioning themselves as straight talkers, just doing it for the players, none of your bamboozling. And because that's actually what marketing's about, right? It's about positioning a brand, personal or otherwise, and that's very key to the marketing, because marketing's job is to stimulate demand. And that is different from immediately selling something. And you do that through smart positioning and ensuring, to use a slightly awkward, wonky kind of marketing phrase, which is from a book called How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp, if anyone wants to get super wonky about marketing, creating mental availability. That is, from a game's point of view, that is people knowing about your game, and thinking and being able to recall and think about it, creating memory structures in your mind. And it makes a lot of sense in that context how having your game played by relevant creators on social and video platforms would make a huge difference there, because it means more people will know about your game. That's going to look really small, isn't it? Sorry, people at the back. And it means more people will know about your game, and if done right, they will know if they are a good fit for your game or not. But, and this is the key point, they might not be ready to buy at that point in time. And that's the disconnect that you have here. Research shows that only about 5% of people are at that point at any one time. It's called the 95-5 rule. It's like all of these rules, it's true some of the time. But only 5% of people will be ready to buy at that moment, which is where Steam comes in. Sorry, I've got the 5% on the next one. So yes, so let's get back to the point. So having creators play your game and putting it in front of people who are good fits builds mental availability. And it's extremely difficult to do direct attribution. Hopefully explained that. Even when you can do direct attribution, and there are some places where you can, mobile games and in some places console games, it is possible. The vast majority of people anyway are not in a space to buy the game at that moment. And they could go on to do it later, the 95-5 rule that I explained. So the job is to create a memory, so when they are on Steam, or an app store or a console store, they are more likely to buy your game. That is the real trick here. That is what you're trying to do. So, just using the same quote again, because I couldn't be bothered to find another one, sorry. So, your favourite creator, if you are part of that community, a creator who you trust, that's a really great way to do that, to build those memory structures in people's minds. And we all know that, right? But the results can be patchy. If any of you have done this, if you had the opportunity to do a bunch of influencer marketing or working with content creators, you'll know that the results from that can be really patchy, because there's another important point here. Sorry, how am I doing for time? And that is that creativity matters, probably more than you think, because to have that mental availability, you have to be distinct. You have to stand out. You have to have a compelling story, a distinctive story, something backed up by what are called distinctive assets. Now, you don't have to have these things if you're Baldur's Gate, because everyone's already heard of it. You don't have to have it if you've been anointed as the hot new game, and a lot of people are chasing that idea of what's the hot new game. But that's a tiny minority, and you can't wait around to be the hot new game. There's some really interesting research in the latest wave of Newzoo research that actually shows there is a cohort of people who wait for the next big game and then they jump on it. But you can't reverse engineer that for yourself, I don't think. And the point being, for most games, for the vast majority of games, you need to fight to stand out, and that's where creativity matters, including working with creators. Away from games, just some more research for you. Recent research, there's a guy called Peter Field, who's a very well-known marketing researcher and analyzer. The study that he's done shows that interesting ads are 6 times more effective than dull ones. And about half of all ads are dull. And dull here is you don't have an emotional reaction to it. But half that's a dull. It's not that dull ads don't work, it's just they have to work so much harder, and they will work if the product, the game, is already incredibly well known. So in games parlance, and just to carry on the use, if you're Baldur's Gate, you can have some dull ads because people have already heard of it and it doesn't really matter too much. But if you're not, then it's no good to be dull. So yes, and that research, it's that spending more money, it takes about 9 times more money to be spent, and I think you can think of money in different ways here, more attention to be had. And this research isn't on games, just to be clear, so these aren't precise amounts, and it hasn't been tested on creator content, but I think it's really interesting and relevant for how we think about how we put games in front of people, because the job is to stick in the mind of someone from when they are on Steam and looking to buy a game. Now, why I think it's really relevant to creator content is because an awful lot of specially sponsored creator content is dull. Now, I don't really mean dull like it's really boring, because most content creators know what they're doing and create great content for their audiences, and that's not what I mean. What I mean when I say it's dull is because it's quite probably just someone playing your game, and that in itself just won't necessarily have an emotional reaction, in which case it's dull. Because if your game isn't well defined enough, doesn't have a clear enough story that will cut through, isn't presented in a new and creative way, then it's dull. And if it's dull, it will be less effective. So the answer is to really double down on what makes your game special and different, on what the experience is, not what the features are, but because all games are experiences. And that's what content creators are really good at demonstrating, is how does it feel? And that's one of the reasons this works so well, because you get to see someone play a game, and when they're good, you get to see how they feel playing that game. And that's something you really have to think about it, and not just outsource to the creator and hope that that will work in this instance. You need to be furnishing them with what about your game is special, what about your game do they need to think about. And that's whether you're working directly with them or through an agency, brackets, work with an agency. But you've got to work with them on how they can best tell that story to their audiences, or feel it themselves, which is the best way. I hope that the one thing you take from this talk is that not that creative content doesn't work, but creative content doesn't work if it's dull, or if you expect immediate attributed ROI results from it. I hope you take from it here that creativity makes a difference, and that you carry that into thinking about your games. There's a lot of you working on games right now, that you think about how that works with your game, what your distinctive story is that can have an emotional reaction. And that doesn't mean the game story, by the way. I mean, it means the narrative around your game and the way you tell that story. And I look forward to a world where we spend less time discussing whether we can prove ROI down to a single video or stream, not possible, and more time talking about creative, effective creator campaigns that are part of a wider marketing strategy that is being measured and understands the need of mental and physical availability, as in being on Steam. So let's recap. Direct attribution could well be fool's gold if what your outcome is actually selling games. Creativity can boost effectiveness by 6 times. Dullness can cost you 9 times more. And I hope that I haven't been dull, but it is possible that you actually turned up hoping for some real practical advice on how to work with content creators. Sorry about that. But so the 4th floor team, some of whom are here today, they have prepared a slide based on deep understanding of and wide expertise of working with creators. This is the score that content creators give us. We ask every creator that we work with to give us a score out of 10, and this is the average this year. And I think that's a very important thing. No, you won't see that from many other places. Anyway, the team, when I asked them, they gave me this. This is real practical advice. I'm not going to talk through this slide. If you've got a camera, you might want to take it. Otherwise, I will very happily send it to you later. There's some very good advice out there, especially if that's what you were hoping to get out of my talk. Anyway, you'll take me a picture. You'd have just rather I talked about that shit, wouldn't you?
I'll make sure that we...
Yeah, sure. Anyway, thank you very much. Do you want to do questions? Or?
We have a few minutes for questions, if anybody's got a question. Hello.
Hi. So, have things shifted in terms of how much, say I gave you £20,000 budget, is a lot of that money going to pay for content creators, or is there still quite a lot of just working with content creators and not being sponsored and managing those relationships? How's that split look working with an agency like yourself?
Depends what you want, what your outcome looks like. Really, our job is to solve your business problems. So it depends where that is. If you already have if you already got a plan, you've got a really great brief, you know the distinctness of your game, then maybe you'd want to think about your 20 grand going into some organic outreach and some paid. You really think about exactly who those creators are and triggering the right ones that will spark in the community. But really about what that content will look like. Otherwise, you might just be wasting your money. But it really depends what your challenges are. Because I think if you haven't worked through your what that distinctive story or your distinctive assets are, you might be better off paying us to create some amazing distinctive assets for you and help you tell your story, and then don't even pay content creators at all because you haven't got very much money. I'm not saying 20 grand is not a lot of money, but actually it's not that much when you're talking about trying to work with content creators. You might be better off just building an amazing story and getting that out to market organically as much as you can. Anyone else?
So you have some like viral marketing people advice, which is more general advice from people like Gary Vee, and I was just like, so I was just wondering, how do you have any like thoughts on what he says, which is basically just to spam content out?
Well, I think he's an idiot, is what I think. But he's a very rich idiot, so but yeah, I would suggest he's not really a marketeer. He doesn't really understand how marketing works, but he's been very successfully doing a thing, and then, as you often find with these sorts of things, he then sells the thing he's done that's made him successful, thinking it will work for everyone, to everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, at the front here.
As someone that both works in marketing and is a content creator, I'd love to know what you consider to be creative content from your creators. Like, obviously, I know dull marketing would be like, oh, I'm going to be Twitch streaming this, but like, what would you consider to be creative from them?
So I think if you're just as a creator, I think if it's just another game you're playing, without really thinking about how that game will engage the audience and what's special about that game, and you're just playing, especially if you're paying it because you've been paid, and it's just going on the treadmill as another game, that's what I would say would be dull. And now that content might be amazing, because I'm sure you're an amazing content creator and your audience might love that, your content, but they won't emotionally engage with that game probably. They'll just be emotionally engaging with you. So it's that combination between you and the game that you want to spark with the creator. And a lot of that's in choosing the right people to work with who will feel that connection to the game, and then we'll be able to give it out. The other thing is sometimes, especially if you've got a little bit more budget, is creating a creative campaign that creators can be part of, but doing it in an authentic way, not like come and join we've got some gangs together and do some social banter or stuff. That stuff's pretty boring. But if you can have a creative hook across a whole campaign that makes sense of different creators, then sometimes that can be a creative way of looking at it as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you. And there's one at the back as well.
If someone's getting the game ready, like talk to content creators, like quick tips or things you recommend people to have ready, like either availability or assets, you think this really helps the content creator to actually get able to think about it for them.
Yeah, there was some stuff on that slide as well about that sort of thing. But absolutely. I mean, being able to play the game is always good. It's amazing where that doesn't happen. And yeah, having some assets that are already created, but really a really good brief is the best thing. You know, you see a lot of briefs that aren't creator briefs. They're just lists of features in games. You know, can you mention these things? That's not a brief. That isn't helping the creator understand the game or what's special about it. So I think that for me, that's the number one thing: is a smartly written brief that has the creator in mind. If you can do that specific to the creator, it makes a massive difference as well. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's just, this will work for, you know, we're going to work with 10 creators and this is a brief for all of them. Creators are all very different. They have different ways of approaching their audiences. So that can be hard work, but it can really pay off.
That's what we've got time for. Thank
Lovely.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rich. If you give us 2 moments to change around, and Anita, if you can come and